Meeting has been scheduled for the Budget Committee to get a briefing by the Western Cape Provincial Parliament on the way forward on a draft Money Bills Amendment Procedure Bill. This is following on from our workshop. And then we're also considering and adopting the draft minutes of our meetings held on the 6th of May, and then dealing with any resolutions or actions that came out of that. My name is Gillian Bosman, and I'm temporarily chairing this meeting, but I'm also a member of this committee. I'm now going to ask all the members online to please introduce themselves.
For the Chair, Ricardo Mackenzie.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Khalil Brankhuis.
Good afternoon, Chair. Andrikus van der Westhuizen, standing in for the chairperson until load shedding is restored in the area.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Derek America. I'll be leaving shortly because Honourable Mackenzie is online.
Thank you very much, members, and thank you very much for those members standing in. Just a note that Member van der Westhuizen is standing in for the chair while she's struggling to connect. I'm now going to ask that our officials please introduce themselves as well.
Thank you, standing in chair. My name is Lubabalo Stemele. I'm the acting secretary, but my full-time designation, I'm a director of Parliamentary Support Services. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andre Leroux. I'm the Senior Legal Advisor.
Thank you very much. We are also joined by our Procedural Officer, Ms. Sima Kamish Ahmad. Also with us is our IT Support Services, and then a very warm welcome to Ms. Lizette Klutter, our Senior Procedural Officer as well. It's very nice to have you. Colleagues, we're going to dive right into it. I understand that we have a presentation from the department. I don't know, Wasima, if you have received this presentation, but I haven't. I don't think any other members of the Budget Committee has. Is there a presentation from the department or from Parliament?
Chairperson, there is a presentation. I was still working on it until about 20 minutes ago, so I'll forward a copy.
Thank you very much. So you may go ahead and we'll go through the presentation, and then we will deal with the content of the presentation during the discussion.
Thank you, Chairperson. I've flighted the presentation. Can everybody see it?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. So I've been asked to present to the committee on the drafting of a Money Bills Amendment Procedure Bill for the Western Cape. I think, as the members know, there's been quite a lot of inputs and workshops, etc. And I think the question has now become more practical in terms of how can the administration support the committee to to actually start getting draft bills, and then ultimately a bill that's ready for introduction, how we can support the committee to do that. So that is the focus of the presentation, is drafting a Money Bills Amendment Procedure Bill for the Western Cape. There we go. The scope of the presentation, we will basically focus on three aspects. The first one is to recommend, and I'll emphasize that word, that's just the recommendation. Of course, the committee may feel that it wants to approach things differently. So it's a recommendation on an approach for the amendment of money bills in the Western Cape, and to consider how a Money Bills Amendment Procedure Bill for the province could reflect that. Secondly, it's to consider the system of enabling instruments. I'll elaborate on that quite a bit later on. a legislature relies on to consider and pass bills, and how that system for the amendment of money bills could be integrated into this. And then, of course, to propose a project plan for finalization of a draft bill. According to the plan, it is intended for the draft bill to be ready for introduction by no later than the end of February, which I think aligns with a preference that the committee also expressed some time ago, that they would like to introduce the bill by the end of January or the end of February of next year. Then we have 4 slides, just speaking broadly on the approach to the amendment of money bills in the Western Cape. I think the point of departure is Section 123 of the Constitution, which requires that a provincial act must provide for a procedure by which the province's legislature may amend a money bill. The committee members will notice that I've emphasized 2 words there, which is that what is required is a procedure as it concerns amendment of a money bill. So it's something very specific that the Constitution requires. So the Constitution does not require that the entire process for the consideration of money bills be taken up in a provincial act. As everybody in this meeting knows, the legislative process is dealt with in the rules of the provincial legislatures, and it's premised on the authority of the provincial legislatures to determine and control its own internal arrangements, proceedings, and procedures, and to make rules and orders concerning its business. In fact, and I'm sure the committee knows this as well from previous presentations, it's almost universal all over the world that legislative process is dealt with in rules, which rules are decided on by the provincial legislatures themselves, because that's essentially related to the principle of parliamentary privilege, meaning that the legislatures themselves must decide how they want to do things internally, and it's not generally considered acceptable for, let's say, the executive or some other authority to decide those issues. Quickly on the Money Bills and Related Matters Act of 2009, that is of course the National Act, so it operates specifically in that sphere. Just to point out that it provides for certain matters concerning money bills in the national sphere, including the procedure for the introduction of the national budget, submission to Parliament of a medium-term budget policy statement, introduction of the national annual budget, division of revenue bills, appropriation bills, and then the adoption of the fiscal framework, national adjustments, budgets, and the like. So there's quite a few things that the National Act provides for. I think I point this out firstly to make the point that these processes obviously informs the provincial budgeting processes and money bills downstream, to put it that way. And then, of course, importantly, the Act also provides for certain minimum norms and standards that the provincial legislatures are obligated to comply with. My observation here is that the Act is broad, in my view, and it extends significantly beyond what is strictly required by the Constitution, which is not a criticism. It's just pointing out that it provides for arguably a bit more than what the Constitution explicitly requires, which is only for a procedure for the amendment of money bills specifically. Maybe to just go into a bit more depth on the recommended approach to the amendment of money bills for the Western Cape, the following, and these are proposals. I think there were quite a few presentations, and quite a few people have already observed in previous meetings that the size and the resources of the provincial legislatures are significantly different to those of Parliament. So one needs to think about, for example, whether a small legislature of 42 members should have a similar size administration, for example, or resourcing than Parliament. That is very significantly bigger. What is strictly required for purposes of a provincial act is a procedure for the amendment of money bills. The legislative process to consider and pass money bills and to amend money bills should be understood as one that includes various enabling instruments, of which the Act is but one. I think that's an important point that I would like to make. Drafting an act is not only about the act itself, there's also a variety of sort of supporting, enabling instruments that will speak to the act, and that's also necessary to make the process workable. I think that's specifically important if one proposes that we approach the Act narrowly, by which I mean that the Act only provides for what the Constitution requires, and then provide for certain other matters in certain other instruments, such as standing rules. By saying that, though, it doesn't mean that one should not give real and substantive effect to what is intended by Section 123 of the Constitution. The intention is that the provincial legislatures must be effectively empowered to amend money bills, and that should certainly also be our approach, is to ensure that whatever we do, in fact, gives effect to what the Constitution, what the intention is. Sorry, members, I just bear with me for a minute. I seem to have lost my space in my own presentation. Okay. So it's not necessary for a provincial act to deal with the entire legislative process of money bills. I think that's maybe a bit different to the approach that Parliament took, and I'm sure they had their own reasons for that. I also think it's a bit different to the approach that Gauteng followed, where they tend to have sort of have an act that deals with the entire process. The legislative process of money bills is already provided for in the standing rules of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, and as everybody knows, the Western Cape Provincial Parliament has in fact been passing money bills for a number of decades. So that is not something new. We pass money bills. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, to put it that way, but we can maybe just focus specifically on what the Constitution requires. So it's perfectly possible to pass a money bill without in any way activating the need to consider amendments. It may even be the case in the majority or in the vast majority of cases that committees consider bills, money bills specifically, and it may be that in the majority of cases no need to amend the money bills is identified. In that case, the legislature already in its standing rules have procedures in place that we are already following to consider and to pass money bills. So it's only once an amendment is proposed that one needs to activate the provisions of a provincial act that deals with the procedure for the amendment of money bills. By providing in an act only for those matters that are required to be provided for in a provincial act, one adds flexibility to the processes of considering and passing money bills and of amending money bills. Standing rules are more flexible and susceptible to amendment than statutory instruments. I also think that's a fairly clear point. I mean, if we think of, let's say, maybe the Code of Conduct Act in the province, or maybe the, that would be another good example, the Western Cape Powers and Privileges Act. The acts have been passed some time ago, and even though from time to time one may feel that there is a room for improvement, it is quite cumbersome it's quite an extensive process to amend an act. It's not a very flexible instrument to amend. Whereas, as the members know, we do amend the standing rules quite regularly, probably at least once a term and maybe more than once a term. As things change, it's easy to amend the standing rules, and of course, as one goes along, one may see that there's a better way of doing something, and then it's quite easy and straightforward to amend the standing rules if that is possible. So the point here is, if the Act only provides for what the Constitution requires, then it gives the legislature quite a lot of flexibility on the other issues that are relevant to amending money bills. It is suggested that a review of the standing rules and the other enabling instruments, which I will refer to later, that process precede drafting of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure Bill. And the reason for that is to ensure that the bill does not provide for matters that can be provided for in these other instruments. For example, one wouldn't want to make provision in an act, a Money Bills Amendment Procedure Act for the province, let's say, just hypothetically, providing for let's say, a parliamentary budget office. And then down the line, one realizes that maybe that is not the best approach, and then it would be quite difficult to amend the act to change that provision. So the reasoning here is if we can see what can be catered for in the standing rules and the other instruments, then we will know what remains and that must still go into the act that cannot be catered for in the other instruments. Then the system of enabling instruments the legislature relies on to consider and pass money bills. The presentation here tries to identify the instruments that may be relevant in the lawmaking process, firstly, when it comes to money bills in general, and then secondly, for the possible amendment of money bills. So I think essentially the question is, what does a committee and or the House need in order to consider and pass a money bill, and more specifically to amend the money bill? There I would suggest the following. It's anticipated that the following instruments are necessary for an enabling system for the legislature to consider and pass money bills, and also to provide for the amendment of money bills. The first one is rules, such as the standing rules of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Already in rules 159 up to and including 182, there is provision for the legislative process in general. And then in rules 183 up to and including 192, there's provision for money bills in particular. So that would be the one instrument, let's call it, that we will probably want to look at in considering a system to amend money bills. And secondly, standard operating procedures. I think the focus there is in committee processes for consideration of and reporting on bills. So the idea would be, if the rules say hypothetically that the committee can make a formal recommendation that a money bill must be amended, then the standard operating procedure will be more of a sort of operational guide, i.e. the committee must consult with the following persons, the committee should follow the following procedure, or word the resolution in a certain way, etc., etc. So that's more for in-committee processes. But I also think this could be really important, especially in the beginning when one starts implementing a system for amending money bills. There may be quite a lot of questions on the sort of operational and practical aspects. Then the third enabling instrument.
Sorry, Chairperson, what slide is this? I just want to make making my notes. I just want to make sure because I can't see the page number.
Slide number 8.
Oh, page number 8. I got it. Thank you.
Sure. Then the third instrument, a procurement policy. We've already mentioned. I'll speak about this in a bit more detail, but we've already mentioned the Parliamentary Budget Office at Parliament. So there needs to be some thinking and some policy decisions on how the committees will obtain the expertise that the committees need to consider the sometimes highly technical issues concerning money bills. And I think these are really kind of specialized areas that committees may need support on. So the fact that committees will need support, I think everybody's agreed on that. I think the question will be how to what would be a proper and a cost efficient and an effective and a responsive, etc. Way of procuring that support for committees when committees need it. And that's the other thing. Again, of course, the issue of the procurement policy will inform the Act. So depending on what decisions it's made, they will inform the committee on whether there should be provisions concerning procurement or an independent advisory body in the Act, or whether that is unnecessary. And then, of course, the fourth instrument that we will need is the actual Provincial Act itself, that will, as the Constitution provides, provide a procedure for the amendment of money bills. Then some comments on how the system of enabling instruments can be set up to provide for the legislative process in respect of money bills, including the amendment of money bills. There's 5 slides here. Again, these are observations, and it's sort of in the line of recommendations. People may think about it differently and may want to approach things differently. But from where I'm sitting, this is the recommendation to this committee. Specifically in respect of the standing rules, it is proposed that the standing rules be reviewed with a focus on the lawmaking process for money bills and for the amendment of money bills. Of course, that latter part is more important. It is required by the schedule of the Money Bills and Related Matters Act 2009 that the standing rules of the provincial legislatures must provide for certain things, including timeframes to introduce and consider money bills, with due regard to the constitutional obligation to facilitate public involvement, as well as comments from the member of the Executive Council who is responsible for financial matters in the province. And so these are already requirements in terms of the National Act. So in that sense, the standing rules will have to be reviewed in any event to provide for these things. There are other aspects of the standing rules as it concerns the lawmaking process in respect of money bills that may benefit from reconsideration or amendment. I think here in the administration, there's been conversations in the past, notably in the procedural hub, whether we should relook the legislative process in Chapter 13, because it's I think we've been using the same process for quite a long time, and there may be ways of modernizing it, to put it that way. So those conversations, there were such conversations. Now, if there is going to be a process to review the standing rules to as it relates to lawmaking in respect of money bills, especially as it relates to the amendment of money bills, one might as well look at some of those other issues as well. These may include dealing with proposed amendments. Rule 184, I'm sure the members know, already deal with amendments of money bills, but the arrangements there are sort of very much the historic approach in terms of which, long story short, a money bill can only be amended with I think the Premier's recommendation or the Minister of Finance's consent. So effectively, that's not really a process where the legislature sort of has the last say in terms of what should or shouldn't be in a money bill. That process is the historic process where the executive effectively had the last say. So one would want to relook at Rule 184. The meaning of consideration of the principle of the bill, Rule 187, I think there's confusion about that. I also think that the process for money bills look different to the process for ordinary bills, probably partly because of the fact that the legislatures in the past haven't really amended money bills. For example, a committee won't approve or consider the principle of a bill when it comes to an ordinary bill, but when it comes to money bills, that expression appears in the rules and nobody seems to know really what it means. Another issue is the referral of money bills to committees and the time periods for deliberation on money bills. I think that also overlaps with what the schedule of the National Act requires us to include in the standing rules. It is anticipated or maybe recommended that the standing rules will be reviewed to identify when an amendment to a money bill has been formally proposed. And I suppose there might be different ways of approaching that, in which case the provisions of the relevant Provincial Act will come into effect. It may also provide for alternatives to a formal proposal of an amendment. So, there may be a member that wants to suggest that a money bill be amended, may have other alternatives for making such a suggestion other than a formal proposal that will in fact activate the Provincial Act. But I will elaborate on that also a little bit later on. Only those procedural matters that cannot be provided for in the standing rules should be provided for in a Provincial Act. The standing rules may be amended to provide for other matters identified in consultation with plenary support and notably the committee section. I just make that observation because obviously once we start consulting internally, we have various centers of expertise in the administration. So certainly plenary support and the committee section may also add, alternative approaches to those that are being recommended here. In respect of standard operating procedures for committees, it is expected that standard operating procedures may serve to flesh out any requirements in the standing rules as amended regarding the process for activating a provincial act for the amendment of money bills, as well as other procedures. Such other procedures may include, for example, referral of a proposed amendment to a future budgeting process, rather than the making of a formal proposed amendment to a money bill that will bring the provisions of the Act into effect. The standard operating procedures may also include procedures dealing with the initiation of procurement to obtain such expertise as may be necessary for a proposed amendment to a money bill. Obviously, everybody would want to have some certainty if a committee identifies the need for expertise. The committee would want to know that it can access that expertise fairly quickly, and that there are systems in place to facilitate that. And then, of course, also what is the protocol, what is the application procedure, etc., to make that happen. The standard operating procedures should provide for consultations with various stakeholders when a committee considers amendments of a money bill. In particular, the minister responsible for finance in the province, and I would think the ministers responsible for certain portfolios in respect of which amendments are proposed. It could be hypothetically that if a member identifies an aspect of a money bill that the member would like to propose should be amended, that there be an initial, let's call it a consultation with the relevant ministers, and that the committee will then after that decide formally whether it wants to pursue that proposal for an amendment. The standard operating procedures may provide for pre-budget public involvement sessions to improve public involvement. I was also thinking that might also be provided for in the standing rules. Maybe one would want to think where's the better or the more appropriate place to provide for public involvement. And then again, the consultation with plenary support and the committee section may obviously inform these recommendations as well, and maybe there will be some additional recommendations, or maybe they will advise that some of the recommendations are not good for whatever reason. Sorry, Chairperson, I'm just rehydrating my throat.
Thank you so much.
In respect of a procurement policy, it is imperative that a system be created whereby a committee that considers amendments to a money bill has ready access to the expertise required for that committee to apply itself to the highly technical matters referred to in the schedule of the National Act. I think the concern here is, my view is that it's probably unlikely that the legislature will appoint a full-time body for advisory purposes. I may be wrong. But I think that being the case, and I think the concern for the committees would be if we do not have full-time access to expertise, we need to know that we can get access fairly speedily. There may also be other matters requiring expertise which are not provided for in the schedule, which a committee may, of course, also want to have expertise on. So it's important that policy decisions regarding resourcing be made before a provincial act is finalized, specifically to identify the matters that may need to be provided for in an act, if any. So it may be that the committee decides that, no, we are happy with the procurement policy. We feel that we can get access to the expertise that we require by the policy. It is possible that the committee may ultimately feel, no, we are not happy with this arrangement. We actually want to provide for something in the Act to make sure that that there is that access to that expertise. As I said already, a provincial legislature is not likely to require the support of a permanent advisory body, such as a parliamentary budget office, even though I actually think Gauteng did make provision for such a type of body. The expense for such a permanent body may also not be justifiable in the case of a provincial legislature. Also further on the issue of a procurement policy as an enabling instrument, it is possible or likely even that a provincial legislature may not often require the expertise necessary for amendments to money bills. I think it's difficult to gauge, the validity of that statement, in the sense that once the legislature actually has a system by which it can amend money bills, maybe we find that there is actually quite a big demand for that. So that statement may turn out not to be 100% correct. At this point in time, it does not appear as though committees often want to propose amendments to money bills, or that's my perception in any event. Arrangements for the provision of advisory expertise may include provision for retainers and or short-term contracts and or arrangements with universities, non-governmental organizations, financial advisory firms, academics, etc. I think, for example, that there's a bit of quite a bespoke arrangement with the Registrar of Members' Interests. So there could be a similar sort of arrangement, possibly with a body or NGO, hypothetically. These are the type of matters that should be taken into account in a responsive procurement system that has the objective of ensuring that committees have ready access to the advisory support they require for the amendment of money bills. I emphasize when the need arises, because it may be that the committees, that there will be no consistent demand for expertise. So there may be long periods where there's no demand, and then there may be intermittent demand, and then there may be peak demand. So one would probably want to look at a system that can respond to all those sort of variables. It is probable that one may wish to consider an arrangement for advisory support from the Financial and Fiscal Commission. It may be necessary to prepare an agreement between the legislature and the Commission, some sort of memorandum of understanding. Should the Commission not be able to provide the required support, alternative arrangements must be considered. Again, for example, should the Commission be willing to give significant support, that may inform the committee's ultimate decisions on the other sort of resourcing decisions that may need to be made. The procurement policy may provide for other matters, obviously, again, identified in consultation with the CFO and notably with supply chains. So I'm not an expert in procurement, so obviously when these processes commence, for the drafting of a procurement policy, we will be heavily influenced by the advices of the CFO and supply chain and asset management. Then lastly, in respect of the Act itself, so I've mentioned the 4 enabling instruments, and then the Act is now the 4th, the one that I just want to make some comments on. The Act will provide for a procedure for the amendment of money bills, but should, in my view, refrain from including matters that can be provided for in other enabling instruments. The enabling instruments provide flexibility. I think, or it's my understanding, that in Gauteng, they've passed the Money Bills Amendment Procedure Act. And my understanding is from the KZN legislature, we had an engagement with them some time ago, that the Gauteng legislature, when they started implementing the Act, they identified that they need to amend the Act. So they haven't brought the Act into operation yet. But they've already realized that there's some things that they need to change. I would advise, or I would think that this legislature would, in as much as it is possible, want to avoid that risk. Now, providing for that can be provided for in the other enabling instruments will give this legislature some flexibility, or a lot of flexibility. So should we realize that, listen here, our approach to procurement or any other aspect to how the Act is activated, etc., that there's issues there, then it could be fairly easy to fix those things by amending the policy or amending the standard operating procedures or by amending the standing rules. It is anticipated that the Act will only be activated once a committee makes a formal proposal for amendment of a money bill. Obviously, we will have to flesh out what that means. How does the committee make a formal proposal? The standing rules may provide for an informal discussion on possible amendments to money bills before the committee makes a formal resolution for an amendment to be considered. So from a policy perspective, a committee may feel that there is some issues that they want to raise, but they may not feel at that particular point in time that they need to bring standard operating procedures for committees and the first draft procurement policy. As I've indicated earlier, the 9 weeks there is the single longest block allocated for an activity, because my suspicion is that getting the first drafts of these documents ready will probably take longer than any of the other steps. I think the members will also notice there that the thinking here is once we have a draft legislative process, a draft standing operating procedures and the draft procurement policy, as I said earlier, that will heavily influence the structure of the bill. So it will inform us, I mean, if X, Y, and Z is provided for in the procurement policy and A, B, and C is provided for in the standing rules, then we know that those things don't need to go into the Act. So the thinking there is to first have first drafts of those documents so that we have that point of departure. So those documents must be made available to the Budget Committee. The proposal is by the 2nd of September. Then the proposal is a week later that there be a meeting with the Budget Committee. Obviously, throughout the process, the administration needs the committee's views, and the members as policymakers need to make those policy inputs on what is being produced. So the purpose of that meeting would be for the committee's inputs on those 3 documents. After that process, between the 9th of September and the 21st of October, it's a 6-week period. The administration will produce the first draft money bills amendment procedure bill. Since we now have an indication from the committee what their views are on the other enabling instruments. So by the 21st of October of this year, that first draft bill should be made available to the committee. Propose again a week later with more or less meet with the Budget Committee for similar reasons to get the Budget Committee's views and policy inputs on that first draft bill. Then by the 2nd of December 22, that's 6 weeks later. So now we have the first draft legislative process, the first draft standard operating procedures, the first draft procurement policy, the first draft bill, and the committee has made its inputs on all those instruments, and we can start seeing properly how the instruments overlap and interrelate and cross-reference and all those things. So the proposal there is then to submit to the Budget Committee first reviews of all those documents. So the administration heard what the committee's inputs are, and now there's a first review process to see how those proposals can be incorporated into the, let's call it the money bills amendment system. Then the members will see there's quite a long gap between the 2nd of December and the 27th of January 2023. The reason for that is obviously December holidays, and I'm not quite sure when the committees will commence working again. So it's proposed then that before or on, let's say, the 27th of January 2023, there will be a meeting with the Budget Committee where those reviewed documents will be discussed with the committee, and the committee will give their views and make their policy inputs on those review documents. And then 4 weeks after that, by the 24th of February 2023, the intention is for the administration to produce and submit to the Budget Committee the final documents. I think maybe of interest there, my thinking was the final proposed legislative process, because it's a standing rules amendment. Pardon. The usual route is for that to go to the Rules Committee and then to the House for approval. The standard operating procedures, my thinking is that would probably have to be approved by the Chairperson's Forum. I don't know, Mr. Stemele maybe, or the Secretary may have a different view. Maybe there's a more appropriate place for that to be approved. The final proposed procurement policy should be approved by the Secretary, and then the final bill is obviously approved by the Budget Committee. That will in effect be the member in charge of the bill once the bill is introduced into the House. I think also as far as the rules and the standard operating procedures and the policy is concerned, there can just be a clause in those 3 instruments that on the day that the Money Bills Act comes into operation, those three instruments will also become effective. And in this way, we basically are on the same time, there will basically be a whole system consisting of all these enabling instruments to provide for money bill amendments. Chairperson, that is my my story, and if there are any questions, I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, firstly, I just want to thank my colleagues for standing in for me for the first 15 minutes of the meeting. Stage 2 load shedding went to stage 3 and affected my calendar today, but I greatly appreciate it to both members Bosman for chairing, as well as member van der Westhuizen for standing in for me. Further, I'm not sure whether it was indicated previously, but the research office has concluded their previous research request from us on time, which was the another leg of research we requested from them. It was written by Ms. Awongiwe Ntenkulu, reviewed by Ms. Amarone Nomdu, and approved by Mr. Ridwan Babu. And I believe that we need to give credit where it is due, and Ms. Ntenkulu has, as always, written a sterling piece of work. If you have not seen it in your inboxes yet, then Ms. Kamish Ahmed, if you can just re-forward that to members. Colleagues, I'm now going to ask for inputs and recommendations, if any, from members. And I would also at the end like to give some positive feedback on the money bills process. We have made certain requests this year to the WCBP in terms of our resolutions as part of our workshop report earlier this year, which was ATC'd and became a report of Parliament. I then consulted Advocate Leroux previously and gave feedback at the last budget committee last quarter, where the committee then mandated me to write to the WCBP with our resolutions previously made. I then wrote to the Speaker of the WCBP, and on the 15th of June, the Secretary responded to the respective resolutions, and this is the WCBP today coming back to us as a budget committee with alternative solutions that they would like us to consider. I see one hand up, but colleagues, I'm going to take hands now. Member Mackenzie, you're first.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you.
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, so I was just waiting to see if there were other hands. Okay, I see Member Nkondlo, so in that order.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentation. We do appreciate the effort and time that has been taken to draw up this. I'd just like to, if we don't mind, if we can, accept the information that was given to us, and we'll take it obviously back to our, at least in my case, to our necessary teams to discuss it, and we'll come back on them. But I think that, having said that, it doesn't mean that the work has to stop. So I'd just like to add to that, if the team can perhaps put this on a Microsoft project plan. I don't know how Dr. Leroux, Advocate Leroux and his team is, or they can perhaps ask IT for systems, just so one can start tracking some of these things. But for now, I think the work doesn't have to stop, and we really appreciate what has been put together and presented to this point, and we'll get back at as soon as where we can with more detailed feedback on this.
Thank you. Yes, there are a number of alternative solutions that are being brought to us, and it has been quite a bit. Member Nkondlo?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Chair, I'm hoping I'm not taking people back. I just wanted to get some clarity on the standard operating procedures versus the rules. What would be the difference in terms of the technical detail and what those are? At this point, if we consider what is a normal process of the bills coming into the House, is it by implication from the research work a need that would actually require new provisions in the rules? And if so, do we know at this point what those kind of rules are? And then secondly, Chair, perhaps just to help me understand the procurement policy, that is being referred to. Can you just indicate, is it a procurement policy that relates to how the function of the money bills, as we had spoken earlier on, would require some kind of an internal capacity? Is that a procurement instrument that would be required for that purpose? If I can just get to understand that. The other issue, Chair, which I think is outside of the presentation, is actually a consideration to the Budget Committee, that I think given the fiscal environment we are in at this point, and what we have been seeing as a decrease to the budget of WCPP, let alone budget to the committees in particular. How actually is this work that we are doing going to be affected by such a decrease? And if we actually look at the already declared budgets for the MTEF, I think I'm just trying to understand, given what I have seen across committees, that one of the things we've experienced is sort of a decrease in our budgets in trying or being expected to do work or more with little. And I'm worried, how is that going to impact actually?
What do you mean it is?
There's a 3+3.
Colleagues, I just ask that you please mute yourself just while the person is on the floor who is speaking. Member Nkondlo, you may go ahead.
Yeah, please share the Streetwise 3, Member Mackenzie. You can send a piece online. So I think I just want to understand that, Chair, what are the implications, especially for this particular piece of legislation and its demands in as far as capacity is concerned. But I'm raising this also, Chair, maybe it's a side conversation on this one, because with the recent trip that I was fortunate to form part of, and our chair of the Finance and Economic Development, looking at parliamentary support, one of the things I think we experienced and we actually were looking at is a really parliamentary support, both in terms of content and admin support. And it is so just for me unsettling when we look at what is happening, and it's not only in this parliament, and I'm just saying in the South African parliament and even in provinces, including ours, that there seems to be really a decrease in budget to support the work that we do. And how is this one going to be affected, and whether it's a conversation we want to take now or would like to ask such be looked at, and we are able to see whether the kind of ideas and issues that were discussed here from a financial perspective, whether these matters will be able to be realized. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Member Nkondlo has actually preempted some good news I wanted to tell the committee. But what I'll do is I'll start with the good news, and then I'll hand over to Advocate Leroux for answering for some of the questions. So as you would have seen on the draft project plan, one of the matters that I engaged with was a meeting with the FFC chair of the Western Cape. I met with the FFC chair because one of the things that we spoke about in the budget workshop was, do we actually need a full-scale budget office? And one of the things we were considering was, well, the FFC is a constitutional body. It is already has the respective expertise and an institutional knowledge. It already works on money bills, and constitutionally, they're already obligated to give all provinces advice on money bills, procedures, and budgeting and matters such as that. I then asked the FFC more or less how much would something like this cost, because what are our options at National Parliament, for example? We can see that the budget office is very, very politicized over the years, and one can start seeing coming through in the research, and one doesn't necessarily want to start a small office then that needs lots and lots of money over the years, because often offices simply grow. They never stay at the size that they were meant to stay. So then that leaves us with very few options. the FFC chairperson with their head of research. Head of research is Mr. Ting. He indicated to me that currently, because they are constitutionally mandated to give provinces advice on matters such as money bills, and that would include matters such as amendments to money bills and budgetary processes, that they would have the capacity and the resources to be able to help the WCPP, and they are happy to make a proposal and even a draft template to us. And then I asked, okay, given that we are in the budget committee, tell me the most important thing, how much is this going to cost? And the FFC said that it would be unfair to make the WCPP pay for this research and capacity if they are not making all provinces pay for this research and capacity. And perhaps in the future, if the NCOP ever considers putting some rules in place where, for example, FFC gets allocation letters similar to the Auditor General from all provinces, then they would consider accepting payment from the WCPP. But even if 8 provinces had to pay them and the other province did not, it would still be unfair. And until such a time, they are willing to do it for free because it's already in their constitutional mandate to be able to assist us on this. Now, I've asked them, okay, what the legal ramifications would be, and they've indicated they will ASAP forward it to their legal head for inquiry, and they are willing to come to the budget committee in the near future to make some proposals on how such a relationship could look like, because that would also then take away the uncertainty that if you had to work with one service provider one year and another the next year, and if we don't pay them, it also wouldn't infringe upon their independence as an institution because they get their funding directly from National Treasury. It's not a matter set in stone. It is just some feedback I wanted to bring to the committee so that when you go back to your various different teams and your study groups, that you can consider how do you feel about this option, and then we can see whether it would be possible, if we are all amenable to it, whether we would like to work with the FFC or not. But that is a little bit of feedback I wanted to bring. Just before I hand over to Advocate Leroux, just regarding the SOP and the rules that Member Nkondlo raised, Member Nkondlo, in terms of how we do this, we can put it into legislation, we can put it into rules, depending on which clauses we want to put where. In the Budget Committee in January, we did make a resolution as part of the report that majority of the clauses we do want in the legislation, but I'm just going to hand over to Advocate Leroux regarding the particular ones that he spoke about. And also I'm not aware regarding obviously the procurement policy part, but I'm assuming that was an option put on the table because we don't know yet whether we're having an office or whether procuring for when we need advice if, for example, we had to bring an amendment to a bill. But Advocate Leroux, thank you so much for having walked this journey so far with us. I mean, you were also part of the Budget Committee workshop in January when we made these respective resolutions. So I really appreciate you being so steadfast with us as a committee. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think you've already addressed quite a few of the questions. There was specifically, I think, a question about the rules and the SOP, and I suppose about the level of particularity of what one would provide for in the rules and what one would provide for in an SOP. As you've already indicated, Chairperson, I suppose it's not hard and fast, and one can see what goes there. But in general, the SOP would be, the rules would be binding. Of course, the expectation is if there's a rule, then you know, it's binding. Persons are expected to follow those particular procedures. Where the SOPs are more of guiding documents. So if the rules say one must do X, then the SOP will more deal with how to go about doing that. So it's more a guiding document, and it's more an operational document dealing with implementational issues, which I think already there is quite a comprehensive SOP in the committee section, and it deals with if a committee receives a bill, it's referred to this one, and then this one must do a memo, etc. So it's very sort of operational compared to the rules. The member asked about whether new rules will be required. I suppose one wouldn't want to preempt that until one starts the review process, but certainly, I mean, Rule 184 at present provides for the amendment of money bills. I've referred to that earlier. So that kind of rule one would almost certainly want to reconsider and replace with some other provision, even if that provision simply is that in future these matters will be provided for in the Provincial Act. But certainly there are some rules that that will have to be reconsidered. On the issue of the procurement policy, I think maybe the expression procurement policy is not maybe the correct word, because it seems like a very big overarching thing. And I think the idea there is just for the legislature to make a decision on how it will obtain expertise. If it's going to obtain it externally from private parties, how is it going to be procured, etc. But I think from what the chairperson now communicated on the FFC's willingness to assist, I think that might become academic. If the legislature is happy that the support from the FFC is adequate for purposes of its consideration of money bills, then you know, I don't think there will be a need for to make provision for other sources of expertise. Yes, those are my comments. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. And just Member Mackenzie's questions, he asked if we can put this on a Microsoft project plan and how it's tracked, and so the members can just have access to tracking how far things are in the process while we take it back to our teams and our study groups in order to bring feedback on how we feel on these new recommendations.
Yes, we can look into that. As the member indicated, that's not my area, but there are other people in the administration that can do things like that.
Okay. Ms. Kamish Ahmad, can I give that homework for you? Yes, no, maybe. Okay. Okay. Colleagues, I'm going to take another round of questions. As I've indicated before, it's the FFC is not written in stone. It's a proposal that I'm bringing that you can take back to your teams as well for consideration. And then we can always hear what the draft proposal would be once they're ready, so that we can see whether we can even save money on expertise, on bringing amendments and budgetary analysis. Knowing once? Going, okay, Member Bosman.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, just on the letter that we received from, okay, so let me just check, from the Secretary, if maybe I could propose that in terms of point 2.3 of that letter, we ask that the Directorate Institutional Enablement make a presentation to the next Chairperson's Forum or to a Chairperson's Forum on the collaboration between institutions of higher learning, because for the purposes of this process, we would definitely want to benefit from any relationships that have been built with institutions of higher learning. Obviously, we have some relationships as the Budget Committee because we had colleagues from Stellenbosch join us at the workshop to make presentations and to give input. But it would be nice to get a more detailed understanding of what that collaboration entails and how we could leverage that expertise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if colleagues have also seen on the research document that the research office did for us, but one of the professors that the research office also engaged in was Professor Christina Murray, which was the third professor that the Budget Committee asked whether she'd be able to attend the budget workshop earlier this year, but unfortunately she wasn't available. And you can see that she's currently a senior advisor for the United Nations on constitutional matters. And I've also written majority of the NCOP work that was being commissioned over the past 2 decades as well. And I know that both UWC and and UCT also has matters such as legislative drafting courses in this regard. And that's what our particular resolution was about, to ask our higher learnings of education whether they can then put together such a legislative drafting course for us, particularly on money bills matters. Yes, so I would then ask Member Bosman if as a committee we can then just refer that to the Chair of Chairpersons Forum to request that such a presentation has been given. I see Mrs. Stemele's hand. Is it on this point?
Yes, Chair. Currently, what we're working around, we've been busy considering and comparing all the programs that have been offered around, and we're also leaning towards also looking and adopting what has been utilized by the University of Johannesburg, because when you look at all the universities currently, it is the only University of Johannesburg that has got an accredited program that is being offered over a period of 6 months. But we're looking at that because both the University of Johannesburg and the University of Cape Town are using the same academics in terms of providing that course, which is Professor Malhelbre and Advocate Erasmus. So we're looking at that. We've been working with, together myself and Mr. Titus. So I want just to assure the committee that indeed we're working on the same thing, on that matter.
Mr. Stemele, can I just ask, have you contacted the deans of the law faculty at Stellenbosch University and UWC as well? Because to my knowledge, both of them also have similar courses.
Some courses, ma'am, will find that they are not accredited. Some will find that they are accredited, that is, they don't have an NQF level accreditation. Some they have. For instance, if you look at most in the universities in the Western Cape, it's what they call it Get Smart. Is the services, which is just to get a certificate of attendance or a certificate of accomplishment. But if you do or you use a similar approach with the Johannesburg, where you get an NQF level certificate, where you will go undergo also the assessment processes and you get a certificate of having graduated in that particular program. So we're trying also to weigh on those and look at the costs and cost effectiveness in all these institutions.
Thank you so much. I will also contact Stellenbosch and UWC again, because previously I spoke to the Dean of the Law Faculty personally. And that's also where I received that information, and I've spoken to the Law Faculty of UWC as well, and that's where I got my information as well. And the reason why we indicated the Western Cape is the Budget Committee in the workshop in January indicated that we would like to spend our money on Western Cape institutions. Hence, we specifically asked for it to be looked at in Western Cape institutions. I see Mr. Adams' hand and Mr. Bosman, but I'm going to first take Member Bosman's hand, because then Mr. Adams can just reply to the request. But I'm very privileged to have an acting secretary and a secretary in a meeting at the same time. Thank you. Member Bosman?
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, I think we also need to be careful of accredited courses, because there are some members who are still waiting for the WITS postgraduate certificate program to start, and we are almost halfway through the year. So if we can get the knowledge to get this process going, we should look at the universities that have that expertise. But I don't think that we should wait for accredited courses, because, as I said, we are still waiting for the WITS PGCE aspect to start, and that's been ongoing for more than 2 years now.
Thank you, Member Nkonta. I'm going to take your hands first, because then Mr. Adams can just respond to everything.
Chair, on this thing of members and capacity building, actually, when I was reading the report, one of the things I was asking myself, I think I saw the CPA actually provides some courses, and I'm not sure Member Bosman would remind me. I think we also met, I think, with some of the colleagues that are running, and were shown programs that actually even including financing and budget for members that are actually internationally accredited. So when I was reading, I think the report, my mind actually went to that over and above, I think the programs that Member Bosman is referring to of VETS, I think we were made aware, and I saw also in one of the emails were sent by the CPA that there are programs, which courses that are already accredited for members within the Commonwealth, and I think an institution that specifically runs programs which are internationally accredited, and whether those are not also considered as part of the package in as far as capacity and training for members. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Mkondlo. I think that's a great idea. If you do know of any specifics, please do forward it to us. And then we can ask the Chair of Chairpersons Forum to also have it part of its consideration. I know our particular resolution dealt specifically with legislative drafting, which is a very technical and almost legalistic type of skill when it comes to finance legislation. Mr. Adams?
Chairperson and members, good afternoon, and thank you for the indulgence, Chairperson. I was thinking about the request that maybe Mr. Titus does a presentation on the collaboration, and also then linked to the question of legislative drafting, whether it would be in order, whether maybe that presentation includes an indication of what are the main areas covered by each of the institutions. So that members also have a bit of an idea of what the course entails, because it may not be comparing apples with apples, and some areas might be a bit more significant than others. So I just wanted to make that input specifically. It then gives at that same meeting members, the chairpersons of committees, an indication of what are the coverage, whether it be WITS or whether it be UWC, University of Cape Town or Stellenbosch, etc., etc. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good idea to, when that presentation is given, yes, to put it in almost a table format to show what the different institutions offer. Member Bosman?
Chair, just to add to what both the Secretary and Member Nkondlo are saying, the body that Member Nkondlo is referring to is the International Centre for Parliamentary Studies, and they have a professional certificate in legislative drafting, as well as a professional certificate in legislative processes that is available. And when the WCPP met with them in London, it was one of the questions I asked with specific mind of the Budget Committee's work, and they have a link with the Institute for Leadership and Management. So there's a lot of scope also for members to be part of an accredited organization as well. So I'm more than happy to send that information on as well.
Thank you, Member Bosman, and please do send that information on. I think it would be very, very valuable for us to consider all of our options. It brings me to another question I would like to ask members. I know members Bosman and Nkondlo was in Wales and learned a lot regarding budgetary matters there and finances. And members Mackenzie and Brinkas and myself went to Brazil in the social cluster. But one of the things we made sure of is that we do not waste a trip. What we did is, even though we were there for the social cluster, we also asked the respective secretariat in their Parliament, which is very similar to the Western Cape, whether they have matters on budgetary matters as well. And they are very happy to send their documentation to us as well, because they actually have methods of how do you change money bills as well. And I wanted to find out if the two groups between us at our next meeting, it could be very similar to, it doesn't need to be a formal meeting. We could always get together as a study group so that we can share with each other some ideas that we could incorporate into the money bills process, if members would be keen for something like that. I see a thumbs up here. Okay. Okay, I'm assuming it's a yes. Thank you so much. What I'll do is I'll try to organize a bit of a more informal study group between all of us then to try and share some of ideas. Okay. Colleagues, with that, can I then ask how long would we like to give the respective study groups amongst each other to go back and then get feedback on the recommendations we've received today? I did receive, I heard a resolution earlier that we tentatively accept these dates and that the work commenced so long for consideration. I am a little bit concerned that if our feedback comes back and we want to amend matters, I don't want it to be one of those matters where you then have to start from over in one particular corner. Member Brancais?
Chairperson is Member Mackenzie. I seem to be locked out of my phone. Me and Member Brancais is together.
Apologies, okay.
I just wanted to, no, that's fine. I wanted to say that yes, the project must go ahead, and I didn't want to discuss the letter now because I think we can respond to that letter. But the point I was actually trying to make is the letter did indicate, and several points in the letter were made, that there is enough capacity in WCP to deal with these matters. So one would have assumed that these timelines would not have gone up to February. But like I said, I would rather want to give a detailed response. So in the meantime, like I suggested, let's let the work start and we get it on a project plan. I mean, the project plan is part of Microsoft Office, so if no one knows how to do it, I'll do it myself. So that we can get these things into a project, because it literally takes you down to the hour. So you need to do 2 hours of this per day, hour and a half for work. So that's what I want to discuss, but because I'm on a bus, it's difficult to discuss those things now. So I'd rather let the work start, and then we can give a more detailed response once we've actually, I want to say once we're back at the proper office in the next maximum 2 weeks, because we can give a feedback, and because some of these things does not require 6 weeks or 9 weeks, because a lot of these contents we spent 5 days together on doing these things, so it's not new work. But like I said, I don't know the proper network to go into detail one by one on the items. I'd rather do that in detail in writing, but in the meantime the work gets started. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm in agreement with that. Members, are you happy with that? If we give until we're back from constituency, and we could possibly be in that first week that we get our first report back on the work done so far. And in the meantime, can we please take these alternative recommendations to our different teams and study groups, and then be able to then also give feedback at the next meeting when we get that first piece of work then? Yes, no, maybe?
That's fine with me, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. It is then so resolved. Colleagues, Ms. Kamish Ahmed, I'm sure you're going to put it into your nice English for us. Okay, I see a thumbs up. Colleagues, thank you so much. And again, thank you for assisting me earlier in the meeting when I had load shedding. Okay, I see a hand from Mr. Adams.
Chairperson, thank you again for the indulgence, and I apologize. It's just for clarity of mind. If Advocate Leroux can just share again the slide with the timeframes, because the first, in terms of those timeframes, the first action was that the committee gives an indication of whether they're happy with the process, etc., and that would happen on the 1st of July. For everything else, then up to the 9th of September, then to be actioned. Are we saying that the decision that the committee had now resolved then takes care of the deliverable that was intended for the 1st of July, and we can now work towards the first drafts of those 3 documents that was intended for 9 weeks hence? To be actioned. I just needed clarity on that, because that then means that from Monday onward, that then kickstarts the process of us getting to work to deliverables too, in terms of the 9 weeks. Thank you, Chairperson. If clarity could just be provided, please.
Thank you so much. So just to be clear, the program so far was taken into the draft project plan was taken into consideration if we were procuring for an expert panel, which we would have had by the 8th of July in order to assist the committee. So now the committee has asked that by the end of the constituency period, let me just see, I think the end of the constituency period is the 25th of July. I think that is correct, the 25th of July, that we are presented with the first piece of work. And that in the meantime, with the proposed recommendations that have been put forward to us today, that we are able to go back to our study groups discuss them, and then come back and say yes, no, maybe, or here are some amendments. I'm not sure if it's Member Brinke's or Member Mackenzie's hand that is up, but I'm going to take the hand.
Thank you, Chairperson. You've covered partly what I want to say, but to answer the question, Secretary, yes, they can start their work on Monday, which is the 1st of July. But when we come back, for example, and the committee meet again, and we've seen, and if Wasima says next week, there's no one who can put this on Microsoft project, and I'll spend a day or so to do it. And then because the points of that letter indicate that there is capacity in Parliament, we might come back and say, well, 9 weeks can actually be done in 3 weeks because, that there was volunteered by Parliament officials that they have the capacity to do it. So it won't be necessarily 9 weeks, it might probably be 3 weeks. That's why it's important to see this in a project plan. But in the meantime, whilst we're looking at that, the work can start.
Thank you so much. Member Mackenzie has captured everything quite succinctly. And members also, please go through the documentation. I indicated again, it is a draft project plan. If you feel that there's something that we can do faster, or if you know of a method that we can get this done in a better and a more efficient method, I always welcome suggestions in this regard. So what I will then do is I will liaise with the procedural officer and the program authority just to make sure that we have some time put aside that we can discuss that first piece of work. And then in that time, I'm also going to then ask the different representatives of political parties just to also give us feedback on how they feel on the respective recommendations, where they feel it's a yes, where they feel it's a no, and where they're like, you know what, let's make a tweak or an amendment here or there. Okay, colleagues, with that, are there any other resolutions that you would like to pose now? Okay, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful Friday going forward. Please stay safe and stay warm and have a lovely weekend. The meeting is thus adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.